What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Logos Podcast. This is Max.
This is Joey.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about modern medicine, suffering, and death, and its relationship to kind of the general medical field. And as a guest to talk about that topic, we have Dr. Ashley Fernandes. Hey, doctor, how are you?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Doctor,
sure.
we're very excited to have you on. I think this is going to be an awesome conversation that Max and I have been looking forward to it for a while. We've been trying to get it on the schedule, and I think the evil one has been trying to prevent us from having this discussion. So exactly. I'm glad we're here. Before we get started, just want to say welcome to everyone who's listening. This is Logos Podcast. Max and I are two seminarians for the Catholic Church studying to be priests. And the whole point of this podcast is to introduce our listeners to the beauty and richness of the spiritual and intellectual tradition of the church so that you might come to know the Logos himself, Jesus Christ. So thanks for being here. You know the drill. Like, share, subscribe to all of our social media stuff. We have YouTube, TikTok, all that. If you want to support our project, you can go to patreon.com/logospodcast. Become a monthly donor. We're so thankful for all the people who support us, and we're praying for you always. So that's probably enough of that for now.
That's right.
Without further ado, maybe we could give Dr. Fernandes a chance to introduce himself. Doctor,
sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, guys. Well, first of all, I am amazed to say that I'm normally the most handsome nerd in the room, but but not today. Now, this is something new for me, so I'll try to deal with that. But thanks again for having me, you guys. Well, I'm Dr. Ashley Fernandes, and I know I don't look like a Dr. Ashley Fernandes. And my last name is Portuguese, but I'm not Portuguese either. My parents emigrated, or ancestrally, they came from a place in India that's called Goa that was colonized by the Portuguese. In fact, St. Francis Xavier is the patron saint of India, and he came to Goa and spread the Christian faith. And so the people that became Catholic took the only Christian surnames they knew, so I happened to get... My family took Fernandes, and
classic.
So and Ashley is just a common. I guess my parents grew up in the British era, the British Raj, and so Ashley was a common boy's name. So that's how I became an Ashley Fernandes.
Yeah,
so,
the first time I encountered you, and we'll talk. Max and I both saw you at a medical ethics conference that you gave here at our seminary, and you opened up by saying, "People are always surprised when they meet me that I'm not a Hispanic woman."
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That was so funny.
Yeah, so doctor, so you also are kind of specialized in this field that we were going to talk, at least in the medical field, just like generally, right?
Yeah, so I did medical school at Ohio State, and in between my second and third year of medical school, I took 5 years off and I studied philosophy. First at Johns Hopkins, and I have to tell you, I ended up with a master's at Johns Hopkins in part because I had to leave their PhD program because they would not approve a dissertation that had to do with the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm
Really?
serious. Yes, no, I'm sure they would be very proud to know that I'm saying this on your podcast.
Oh my gosh.
But that's what happened. They said I could change it to Aristotle if I wanted to, but they weren't really comfortable with that either. And essentially, after that, I went to Georgetown and finished the PhD at Georgetown under Dr. Edmund Pellegrino, who's one of the sort of fathers of bioethics and a very wonderful Catholic physician who self-taught himself philosophy and then taught me. So it was God's will. It was great to study at Georgetown.
What made you want to leave medical school halfway through and study philosophy?
Well, I had in undergrad started to just fall in love with philosophy. So my undergrad, I ended up getting 2 degrees, one in biology, one in philosophy. I was studying biology because I was pre-med, but there were so many more questions I had about not how the body works, but the sort of ethics and morality behind medicine itself, that I knew just a biology degree, which is a science, which sort of tells you what is, but doesn't tell you what ought to be, couldn't answer. Those empirical questions can be answered by science, but the things of this world that are so important, the human aspect of human medicine, could not be answered by biology alone. So I started to pursue this route of philosophy. I was pretty good at it, and I had this professor who was ideologically opposite from me, but this is like what we called an old school liberal, and she was like, you're pretty good at this. maybe you should think about doing a minor in philosophy. Okay, so I did a minor and then a major and then a separate degree. And then by the time I applied,
Because why not? Am I right?
Why not? It was just like, oh, just one more class, 2 more classes.
Yeah.
Oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do that. And then, so when I applied for medical school, I actually told Ohio State that, hey, if I come here, this is what I would like to do. I'd like to take academic leave to pursue this advanced degree.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it was a plan going in.
Yes, it was a plan going in, and they allowed me to do it. And I've been really blessed. I came back 5 years later and continued medical school. So you can imagine taking 5 years off from medical school to study philosophy and coming back. So fear drove me those last 2 years. And it is amazing what fear can do for your learning. I mean, it's just like, whoa, I better really buckle down.
Oh, my gosh.
And during that time, I also met my wife in medical school. She was a normal third year who was going through med school.
Okay, beautiful.
And then fear ensued all the more, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. It was like I had fear and then fear on top of fear. No, but I was like the mysterious philosophy guy that nobody knew.
Yeah, what an aura.
Who he was. Yeah, I had this mysterious aura around me, so that was really good. Wow. That worked to my advantage. They didn't know like the absolute terrifying fear that was all bundled up inside. So anyway, I ended up doing residency in pediatrics, and my career has been split between clinical pediatrics. So I'm a professor of pediatrics, and then I also work in bioethics education and professionalism education, and I teach residents and medical students, and it's been a very wonderful career. And all the while, just so your listeners know, I haven't had to give up a shred of my Catholic faith.
Wow.
It's the more I learned, the more I discovered that what the church teaches comports so beautifully with science, the tool that God made to discover truths about this world. And so there's nothing contradictory. It's only affirmed and confirmed what I know to be true from what the church teaches, and it's been a great ride.
Doctor, now that doesn't come without challenges, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure you in your own profession have met some opposition. I mean, you speaking now, even just in your advanced degree pursuits, you met some opposition there, but I'm sure that doesn't come without some sufferings, right?
Absolutely. That, I sort of knew going in that would be the case. And and I think for people that, people have to discern their vocation, of course, and then where do they want that to take place? What's the venue for what you're called to do? I think for a lot of physicians that are Catholic and that are committed to their faith, some of them choose to work in Catholic settings, for example. Some of them may choose and discern to work in the world and to try to translate the language of the church into natural law, into natural language that can appeal across religions and across different perspectives. And I've always believed that that's what I was called to. So I knew going in that that's the risk. You can always feel, I think actually you two as young seminarians going into the priesthood, you're actually taking it, quote unquote, to the world. People may think, it's so safe to be a Catholic and become a priest, but as both of you know, there's so much opposition. It's not safe at all. Even though you're in a Catholic setting now, you're preparing yourself for this journey into the world. So like you, I kind of I knew that there was going to be suffering, there were going to be challenges, but it's worth it. If people are open to the truth, the way God made our hearts was to grasp onto that truth. So I think that's always the hope, is that if we believe what's true about how we were created, then there is a way to convince even people that hate you and that are so opposed to your point of view. There is a way. I may not have the ability or the grace to be able to do that here and now, but maybe I can write it. Maybe I can forge a relationship with this person, and over time, these conversations will lead there.
And they're made for truth too. That's what the whole thing is. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think if we believe that, then even going into a career like bioethics in a secular world where you have these views, there's nothing to fear. It's just you can anticipate that suffering will come.
Yeah. And okay, and so you're a husband, and do you have children as well?
Yes, I have 2 kids. Okay. They're 15 and a half and 13. They're both taller than me, so they've accomplished that. I'm pretty sure they're both smarter than me. So
wow.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Maybe we should have them on.
Yeah.
Well, that's just fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This process of this attempt to kind of sanctify the temporal order,
Yes.
that like you said, translate the truths of the faith into a secular context. That's, to a large extent, that's what Max and I are trying to do on this podcast in a lot of ways. It's like,
right.
Engage people on the level of truth, on the level of their desire for reason, their desire to know, the logos, all these things. So that's really cool to hear you say that, and awesome to know that you're doing that in the medical field.
And also, that's actually also where at least for myself, where I was motivated to then kind of invite you onto the show. We were at that JP2 Institute conference. I think it was put on by JP2 Institute. Is that right, Doctor?
Yes. By the John Paul II Foundation, which is in Houston, Texas, and then the Catholic Medical Association of Central Ohio, and not your diocese, the Catholic Diocese of Columbus. Was also a major sponsor. So. And we just had that medical ethics conference. We had 165 people attend right here at the Josephina Majestic Center.
Yeah.
It was amazing. There were medical students and seminarians and physicians and nurses and speakers from around the country, and it was great.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that's where I was kind of motivated and attracted to like what y'all were saying in general, right? So like you were one of the first speakers at the conference, and I was just in general kind of like, oh wow, I didn't know this existed. But also, the world needs to know that actually the church takes medicine very seriously, and it takes personhood very seriously across all levels, from conception to natural death. And I think you and your own kind of expertise in both philosophy and medicine, I figured, hey, why not bring this guy on to talk about both of those aspects, and kind of having both a PhD and an MD, which is wild to me. And I think correlates beautifully to this topic. Yeah.
Well, thanks. No, I mean, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So I guess getting in. So what we want to kind of hash out today is the relationship precisely between modern medicine, the way it's practiced today, especially in America or in the West, whatever you might want to say, and its relationship to suffering, and how our understanding of the human person fits into that relationship. So that's kind of where we want to go with this conversation. I think for me, I've noticed in our culture, even in my own life, a tendency in the practice of medicine, the way I've encountered it, to simply treat symptoms, simply kind of, there's a whole industry of pain management in this country, of over-the-counter drugs. It can just like take away your symptoms, but don't really get at the root causes of things. I think the COVID pandemic kind of in many ways brought this hyper focus on physical suffering to the forefront of our minds. For many people, the fear of any kind of physical suffering or illness completely paralyzed them and shut them down. For some people are even still dealing with that anguish and that fear. And so that's kind of, I guess, my first question for you is: do you notice that trend in the practice of medicine as you experience it? This lack of a desire to really get at the root causes of things, and more of a desire to just take away pain, take away the symptoms.
Yeah.
Doctor, let me add to that, because it was, on one sense, there's like this anxiety that people had, right, with the illness, the suffering, the death that was kind of knocking on their door, but also the kind of abundant faith, if you will, that was placed in modern medicine to kind of bring a solution to these things, right? So like you had this interesting dichotomy where there was fear, there was death, there was suffering all around us, but then there was also like hope, faith, and joy in kind of modern medicine that was kind of conflicting there. And so I don't know, just your take.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love both of your questions. They're interrelated, obviously, and it was a false god, right? I mean, basically this whole, and I tell people this, I hated that expression during the COVID period. We're still seeing it. We see it with people that are pro-choice, and they're talking about, they say believe the science, okay? Yeah. And in COVID, you say believe the science, and that always struck me as such an odd and inaccurate expression, because you believe in a God, but you don't believe in science. Science itself is an empirical discipline. It's a discipline of skepticism. It doesn't have the tools to allow someone to believe in it. You can respect it, but it's not a God. Even Albert Einstein said we should be careful not to put too much faith, I'm paraphrasing here, not to put too much faith in science. He said it has powerful muscles, but no personality.
Wow.
And what he meant, I mean, this was one of the greatest scientists of all time.
Yeah.
And what he was trying to say was you need that human connection in order to give meaning to science, in order to answer questions that transcend science. And so to get to the first question is, there is this dichotomy there that you start to see where people. So let me answer it from two different ways.
Yeah, please.
There's an anthropological way to answer this question, and there's a psychological angle. The anthropological way is that there is this belief in modern medicine today that all we are is material, is atoms, is the biological parts, the sum of our parts is all that the human person is. In philosophy, we call this the materialist view.
Yeah.
And essentially all that is real are the things that can be experimented on. And this view tends to dominate medical education, and as a consequence, it tends to dominate science and the way we practice medicine. There are two huge aspects that are connected. This idea that of what the patient wants, okay? And then what their good is, what's the patient good, is totally related to what they want. And then the second one is what is their biological or physiological good, because that's all there is. That's the only reality that there is. And if medicine is taught that way, that this is all that medicine is what the patient wants and what their biological good is, their physiologic good, then you can see how a concept like suffering is radically altered. Because now, all that my body is suffering, I'm in pain, for example, or I'm in psychological pain.
Yeah.
If I don't want that, there's the autonomy part.
Right.
If I don't want that, that's all the reality that there is. I don't need to bear suffering any longer than I choose.
Yeah.
If all the reality is of a fetus is that it is a random collection of atoms that happens to be inside another random collection of atoms, then if I don't want this thing, this biological thing, and I'm suffering because of it, I can get rid of it. Nothing happens, and nothing happens after you die. That's a really serious anthropological, I think, error, but it's a serious one, and it's one that tends to dominate medicine nowadays, even for Catholics, even for well-meaning Catholics. We tend to, and so that's the anthropological part. The psychological part is that from the point of view of physicians, it is a real temptation to comply with that anthropology, because well-meaning, loving physicians who care about their patients can use medicine as the quick fix, as, okay, well, I've attended to your biological needs, and now I'm done.
Right.
And I don't have to deal with any of the messy part. I don't have to deal with the spiritual part. So take, for example, something like ADHD, which I see a lot. Okay?
Yeah.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which I see a lot in my practice. A physician working on that materialist anthropology, who's well-meaning, but sees the body as everything. Now I have this medicine. You've got a pathology. You cannot focus. You are hyperactive. This is a physiologic process. Now I have this fix for your pathology, and I can write a prescription for it, and you can take this pill, and my job is done. And it helps the physician in a psychological way so it's a temptation to avoid all the complex, interrelated psychological and spiritual elements that go into true health.
Yeah.
So we can tend to be drawn into that, and it's rewarding. There's a feeling like I've done something.
Right.
We see this with, Colorado has a program to incentivize teenagers to have long-acting reversible contraceptive implants in every teenager on Medicaid. So they incentivize young teenage girls, as many who are on Medicaid, to have these long-acting reversible contraceptives implanted into their bodies.
Oh my gosh.
Now, from their point of view, their outcome is we can reduce teen pregnancies tremendously by doing this.
Yeah.
That is their outcome. They feel very good about that. They feel like they're doing a service. So they're not motivated by anything necessarily bad. They think they're doing a service. But there's this temptation there. Yes, it might be 99% effective. Mm-hmm. But to do that then avoids all of the other issues that a physician should be talking to their patient about.
Right.
We should be talking to them about why do they want to have sexual intercourse when they're a teenager? Are they consenting to sexual intercourse? What is their self-esteem like? What is healthiest for them in the short term and the long term? Mm-hmm. But people don't want to have those conversations. And all of that relates back again to anthropology and how you view the human person. And that's why the church's contrast with what we believe is so stark and so beautiful when you contrast it.
Yeah, and we'll certainly get into kind of that, what the church's counter-proposal to this materialistic worldview is and how that relates to medicine. But what's fascinating to me about that is even on a materialistic, worldview, oftentimes the solution that the doctors introduce into the equation in order to bring about the fix, even materialistically, it's not the best solution.
That's right.
Because merely to take away the pain on a surface level, you're actually not restoring the organism as a whole to its you're not getting at the root cause.
Or doctor, also, like as an example that comes to mind, right? If a person is put on contraceptives for a long time, let's say birth control in this example for a female, right? Her womb is like damaged, and her capacity to then receive life when she does desire it is harmed in a long stretch of time. And this is like, for example, one of those things that on a purely materialistic standpoint, if you will, viewing it kind of biologically, there's also a harm being done that's not being considered or avoided or neglected. So anyways, just to add to the discussion, I think that's another aspect of this conversation.
Absolutely. Or you take something like abortion, where we know there are post-abortive effects on the women, both psychologically and spiritually, and there's a lot of empirical evidence to suggest this. But allowing a person's choice to dominate that moment, rather than looking at the long term, and also rather than even seeing the unborn child in the womb as a real human, as a person of value, is a travesty. Again, if you take something like assisted suicide or euthanasia, when someone is in intractable pain let's just take that example.
Yeah.
If you're a person who believes in the materialist view, why should you suffer any longer than you want to? You shouldn't embrace that suffering any longer than you want to. And once you've reached that threshold, you're done.
You should have a right to.
You should have a right. And if you really think about it, if you embrace that view, it makes sense.
Yep.
If nothing happens to you, if there's nothing transcendent about the person, then and when you die, you become worm food.
Yep.
Then it would be almost silly to bear suffering any longer than you or maybe your family wanted you to, and that would be it. And I think there's a real, again, that's a temptation. It's the easy out, and physicians have to be better, nurses have to be better. We have to try to change the culture around suffering.
Yeah, I was gonna make a comment, and because I've oftentimes, and this is kind of part of really one of the kind of crux of the conversation, right? It's the way that modern medicine views the person or the value of the person as kind of juxtaposed in some ways, maybe not completely, but certainly in tension with some of the views that the church has in its views of the person and the value of the person and what gives a person kind of what we would say intrinsic dignity, freedom, flourishing nature, these kinds of, we use these words, and people all of a sudden get like a little contrived because in their minds, to use these words is all of a sudden to also kind of box in a person, is also to label a person, is also to kind of take away what seems most immediately beneficial. As you were saying earlier, I think it's like that because we also live in a world that is largely kind of shaped by convenience and benefit. And one of the things we didn't mention too here, it's like give the person medicine because guess what? There's a huge industry that makes a lot of money off of it too. So it's like there's all these things being at play, but at the source of it is a large kind of neglect of the personhood, which we in the church view as deeply, deeply valuable, and we would say was it Pope John Paul II says it's like the window into Christ's heart, It's like, it's
Yes.
not just this
Right.
kind of
It's
collection of clumps of cells that, and Joey and I talk about this all the time, but it's not just like the colliding of atoms coming together, exerting force. It's actually something that was created by God. Joseph Ratzinger, you've heard of him. I suppose you've heard of him, right? Pope Benedict the 16th.
Here and there.
He has this book that just came out that actually Joey recommended to me, and I suggest you all to read it. It's called The Divine Project, right? But if I could put it in one sentence, what is the Divine Project? Man, right? Right. And so it's like, but again, this is a view that this church carries forward and is kind of contested with by the larger world. And I think you're right to talk about and kind of almost criticize and challenge people in the modern medical field to live up to that standard that they were also given as a great privilege to serve.
I just want to clarify one thing that Max just mentioned. This book by Ratzinger that just came out. Ratzinger has in fact died. He didn't just write this book. But what's cool about this book is it was a series of lectures that he gave back in 1985.
Oh, wow.
And the cassette tapes were buried in like a box in this random, classroom somewhere for like 30 years. And recently
amazing.
uncovered.
An abbey in Austria somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
this is like the most gangster Ratzinger thing that's ever happened.
Right.
He's dropping
like
mixtapes after his death.
Dead
This
Sea
is crazy.
Scrolls. It's like the modern
That's
Dead Sea
right.
Scrolls. They found it in a
Yeah, that's
basement.
right.
That's right. So, okay, our next question. Well, I just want to first clarify also, Max said, we've talked about this before on other episodes, but it makes sense in a certain respect that the materialistic worldview is dominant in the medical field and the scientific field because, like you said, Doctor, in order to actually do science, you have to proceed merely based off empirical observations,
Yes, right.
And so you kind of have to bracket everything else in order to strictly do science. But the problem starts to become when you start making philosophical assumptions that you're not gaining from your empirical studies and then applying those to the way you practice medicine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was so well said. I think that's the problem is that science and medicine can lack that humility that says there are things outside of our box, out of our expertise that we just don't know. And instead of admitting that, they just say that, well, this is all that there is. Again, another temptation that we can't fall prey to, but it's there.
Right.
There's so much power associated with the tools of science and the tools of medicine that it's easy to sort of become intolerant of mystery. And I think that's one of the things, when you guys were talking about is how much tolerance do we have as people for this mystery of the human person? Can we really ever understand the value and significance of the person? I mean, you guys as seminarians, you probably know that even this word person or persona, which means mask, kind of was really used to try to explain the Trinity.
Yeah.
And for a long time, you weren't allowed to even use that word to apply to a human being. It was only by sort of extension or by analogy that we were persons in the true sense. But if God is itself a mystery, we can talk about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, still a mystery, then we as human beings who created in that image, also there's this mystery to us. We have to be able to admit that we can never really know this sort of ineffable essence of the human person in its entirety. And because of that, we should look at that mystery with a little bit of awe. The scientists of old, the physicians of old, when they didn't know as much about the human body, we didn't have the human genome spelled out. We looked at that with some awe.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, well, it's a mystery, and we will work. We respected that. On this sort of new world materialist view, everything we need to know is in front of us. Everything that we can't know by empirical science is rubbish.
Yeah.
And so this idea of dignity in bioethics has come under attack. There have been very prominent medical ethicists that say that humans have dignity is religious mumbo jumbo that's being placed on medical ethics. Dignity is just a religious term.
Wow.
It doesn't mean anything. And what we have to do is really see dignity as autonomy and autonomy as dignity. Choice is the same thing as dignity.
Yeah. Which makes sense that, so clearly, hopefully it's evident to our listeners that a conclusion like that is is absurd, that human beings do have dignity. And so
Right.
the reason somebody might have come to that conclusion necessarily implies some sort of philosophical presupposition.
Correct.
That leads them to draw that conclusion.
That's kind of what bothers me, is actually like so many people are willing to accept the default position of materialism, and that somehow religion, transcendence, metaphysics is some overlay that we just made up.
Yeah.
That's the end result of the neurons of your brain that makes up this thing called God. And I would suggest that if you look at the history of the world and what people from all across the world have believed, the default position should really be human beings that accept a mystery, accept transcendence, accept a God, and let the materialists prove that the non-rational is irrational, and they can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact,
okay,
I was
so
reading. I was reading recently. Oh, what's his name? It's not going to come to mind right now. But he's a physicist, and one of the things he was writing about was that oftentimes there is, even just kind of from the physicist's perspective, an attempt to, and we have this all the time, right? This attempt to explain the existence of God or the lack thereof by purely physical means, granting therefore an idea or kind of a rational process that has required things that are not necessarily physical, ideas being one of those things, language being another one of those things. Like we have all these things that are not physical yet are real and prove to us and show us something kind of profound about reality that I think, as you're kind of more generally speaking here, Doctor, saying like we can't just full-fledged accept materialism on its front because it's deeply flawed. Logically, it's flawed, but also just like experientially, it seems to be lacking as well.
Well, I mean, can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there with these two. I mean, St. Pope John Paul II talked about this in his sort of critique of philosophy in the West, that the West is really focused in the era of Kant, of Immanuel Kant, and starting with Descartes and this dualistic notion, but the rationalists, which came to dominate sort of the postmodern era, this idea that you could explain everything by reason alone.
Yeah.
And he sharply criticized this. And on the other hand, he criticized some of the German philosophers for saying, hey, it's all about experience. And instead he said, look, what reality is that we can extract truths from our experience. That part of the moral life cannot be neglected. And nor can we neglect reason either. But in extracting truths from experience, we have to recognize that there is truth.
Yeah.
Right? That transcends both reason. It's the same vein that runs through both reason and experience is truth. Right. That's what tethers everything together. And sometimes, both in medicine and in our lives as human beings, we can recognize things only by experience. I mean, people who, for example, I know a physician, Catholic physician, who was not so Catholic at one point, was doing abortions and helping in abortions. I mean, he was a radiologist, and and once they called him in to do an ultrasound while an abortion was going on to make sure that the abortion, this sort of later term abortion, took. And when he turned and he looked at what he was doing, he had this sort of conversion moment. You know, he could not, he could no longer do what he was doing, and he started to rekindle his Catholic faith. Mm-hmm. But that's a moment where it wasn't a series of arguments. It wasn't reason that made him believe. It's that he faced with this experience of seeing an unborn child on an ultrasound and what was actually happening hidden behind the dark veil. He saw truth. He grasped the truth. And I think we need to be, that experience kind of is a way to penetrate some arees that are cloudy to us and that we don't like to reflect on our experience as moral beings. Yeah.
Wow. That's I've heard of similar stories like that, but it's so true. It's like, how many arguments might he have heard in his life about abortion, but now it's boom, it's this moment.
Yes.
Okay. So doctor, you are thankfully out there in your field of expertise in the medical world. You're teaching, writing, sometimes arguing against this materialistic worldview. Right. What instead are you proposing? Like, what is the human person and how should we understand the human person when we are carrying out particularly the practice of medicine?
Sure.
That's an easy question, Doctor, too. So honestly, you shouldn't take you but 2 or 3 minutes.
I mean, it's a dissertation in and of itself, but briefly, yeah.
Well, when I did my dissertation actually on philosophical anthropology as it relates in the thought process of Karol Wojtyła, who was Pope John Paul II, and who became Pope John Paul II. So he was a philosopher before, and he studied these notions of person and what the nature of the person is. And in the field of philosophy, we call what John Paul II adhered to was a philosophy of personalism, specifically Christian personalism. So let me take the Christian aspect first.
Okay.
For people that are Christians, and particularly Catholic Christians, we believe that humans have their value from really 2 sources. One, their creator, who is God. God the Father creates human beings and imparts on them a absolutely unassailable value because of the fact that they are God's creatures who are created in his image and likeness. And then, of course, there's that counterpart to that, which is that Jesus Christ himself, by assuming the personhood of a man, then further sanctifies human beings and gives them that dignity that also, if Christ died for us and became one of us, our value is secured in that beautiful act of sacrifice. That's the Christian part. The personalistic part is this idea that when we start to break apart, what does it mean to be a human being? John Paul II says there are basically 4 things that make up what a human person is. First is a person that thinks, that person that can reason. Okay, that the kind of being that can reason. And of course, man is a rational animal. We've all heard that, anybody who studied philosophy. He thinks that doesn't go far enough. That's part of it. We're not just rational animals. We're more than that. So he says, look, human beings, the human person also has this capacity to love, to give themselves selflessly to another person. You guys are giving yourselves selflessly to Christ and to the church.
We hope.
People give themselves selflessly, or try to in marriage, ideally, to their children. So there is this only human persons can really do that and have that experience of love. Third is human beings act morally. And no other creature on earth can act morally. That is to say, and he puts it this way, to be able to say, I could do this, but I won't. Okay? If you put 4 bowls of dog food in front of a dog can, quote unquote, choose which one they want by smelling which one tastes better to them. They're almost always going to go for the one that their instinct tells them. But only a human person can have moral choices and say, I could do this, but I won't. That's really what makes human beings human persons, is not the ability to choose, but the ability to choose the good. And he believes that in acting morally, the human person becomes transformed only in that act. So let me expand on that a little bit more on this acting morally part, which is sort of this third part. We think to ourselves, we have this expression colloquially, like, I want to be a better person.
Yeah.
John Paul II, think of that. You guys should think of this as a metaphysical statement. When that word be, I want to be a better person, your being actually changes when you do a good act, when you commit to a good act, and you recognize yourself as the originator of that act. It changes you. It changes your ability to see right from wrong, to be able to embrace the good and have that, he calls it the experience of the moral act. So this is not reasoning to a moral act. It's when we do something good and we recognize ourselves as the author of that moral action, it transforms the nature of our being and makes us better, literally a better person. And the converse is true. When you do continuously bad acts, your metaphysical character changes so that your conscience is even altered, right? So we always see these people that, they always seem to do the right thing. Yeah, they do seem to do the right thing because this is a habitual practice that is changing the person. And likewise, the people that always do the bad thing, their ability to see and discern what's right and wrong also changes.
Yeah.
But this is a characteristic that only human persons can have. and to act morally is such a it's such a sacred, it has such a sacred character, such a serious character. That's why the materialist view in contrast is kind of insulting. Like, all we have to do is choose, and whatever we choose is good.
Right.
No, John Paul II says we should choose the good, not whatever we choose is therefore good, by the fact that we choose it. That to me is like almost insulting of what the human character is or should be. Well, and I think the last thing that John Paul II says the human person is, and what gives them their value, is that human persons live in solidarity with another. And he uses this word solidarity. And I think this is just a wonderful idea that shows the interrelatedness of human persons to one another. Martin Luther King Jr., who was another personalist, Christian personalist, although not a Catholic, but he had this great quote where he says, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality.
Wow.
And he was right.
Yeah.
That and John Paul II, sort of echoes this when he talks about how this notion of solidarity means, even to bring it back around to our discussion of suffering, even in suffering, there is a solidarity there that's part and parcel of being a human person. Why is suffering important for us? Because we are called to solidarity with another person who suffers. That's part of our nature. To avoid it, to try to run from it, to say suffering is evil, it does damage to the nature of ourselves as persons.
That's interesting. It reminds me of, the word compassion, right? That word, so etymologically, right? So that the root of the word is to suffer with.
Yes.
And there's this big, it's right in the Christian tradition, obviously we have, and then historically being the case, we have the passion of Jesus Christ. Kind of like, on purely materialistic terms, that seems like the most useless, the most excruciating thing. But in the Christian worldview, in the Christian view, we actually see it as something redemptive, but as something that we're actually called to enter into. Not just neglect, but actually enter into the suffering that our Lord himself took upon himself on the effects of sin, or whatever the case. But like, there's this the compassion that man is able to kind of foster it does seem to me a kind of a purely personable thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in medicine we would always say, well, you want a compassionate physician.
Yeah.
That means to suffer with another, and sometimes there is nothing more you can do when you walk with a patient except to suffer with them until you sort of run out of tools. But then what do? Then do you abandon the patient? No, like Catholic physicians know, and I think the secular world needs to know, that that's not the end of the road. Sometimes what you still have, and I tell my medical students and trainees this of any faith or any religion, you still have the gift of yourself.
Yeah.
You're never out of tools because you've run out of scientific tools. If you can't offer someone something that they want, you still have yourself. You still have your ability to sit by the bedside of a patient, the presence of yourself. That is your sort of secret weapon, the weapon of all weapons against, sort of human suffering can be the presence of another. And I think the church has this really great tradition of operationalizing that notion of compassion in our hospitals, in hospice care, in palliative care. These are things the Catholic Church invented. And we can't forget that. People that attack the church now have to understand that the church was at the forefront of medicine itself, and at the forefront of science itself, certainly in the idea of charity hospitals, in the idea of care for the poor. We're the original, the OG of social justice. So.
OG, right. What's up?
That's right. Okay, so this is also this is beautiful. Now, given this kind of understanding of what the human person is, which is so much more, so much infinitely deeper than just this material pile of cells, right? Given that that's what a human person is, can we say, I'm wondering philosophically and then of course theologically, that there is value to suffering in such a way that when a patient, for example, is experiencing suffering, my goal as a physician should not necessarily be to eliminate that suffering at all costs, that there may be some value to the experience that that patient is having. Of course, obviously, part of the doctor's role should be to suffer with someone to try to restore them to health is going to involve a desire to take away their pain to some extent.
Right.
But how do we navigate those waters? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. I think that is a tricky question to articulate. It's a tricky question to answer, right? Because if you think about what a physician does or what a nurse does, no physician or nurse, Catholic or otherwise, ever wants people to suffer.
Right.
No priest ever wants
Exactly.
a congregant to suffer or a person that they take care of to suffer. But the question is, and so I think in asking the question, we're already recognizing that there is a limit to what we can do. That's an anthropological turn as well, because if you're on the materialist view, right, there is no limit to what you can do. When you've reached your limit, there's no other reality beyond what we can do with our hands and what we can do with these medical tools in front of us. And so, yes, that's it. We end suffering. In fact, in the extreme cases, if you think about euthanasia and assisted suicide, we end your suffering by ending you.
Yeah.
That is how serious that sort of attack or war on suffering is I can't take the fact that I can't do something for you. So now what I'm going to do for you is eliminate the subject, his or herself. I think that's really a radical, crazy idea for medicine. It's like, oh, I can heal you by killing you, except with almost any other therapeutic option in medicine, the subject is present before the intervention and after the intervention. In the case of assisted suicide and euthanasia, they're so fearful of suffering and in some ways so fearful of admitting that they're out of tools.
Right.
That the only way they can quote unquote help you is by killing you. And I think what we need to do is when you ask this question about how much sort of suffering should we tolerate? Again, no physician or nurse ever wants to say people should suffer needlessly.
Yeah, exactly.
So our goal is to try as much as we can to ameliorate that suffering, but recognizing it may not be possible to eliminate it altogether. So if I have someone that hurt their knee, I'll tell them, okay, you can take up to 600 milligrams of ibuprofen, and I hope that the pain and suffering goes away. But I'm not going to tell them, oh, just take 200 so that they get a little bit of suffering, so they become sanctified, right? So we want to do something that tries to eliminate as much suffering as possible.
Yeah.
But recognizing that there are limits to that, and that if there is suffering that goes beyond what medicine can do, that there still may be some palliative measures we can take, some healing measures that don't come from technology and may not come from pharmacology and may not come from a surgical technique. They may just come from the presence of another human being who cares. It may not even be a doctor. It may be a priest at the bedside. It may be a family member at the bedside. All of that should be seen as, if you really think about it, not just trying to ameliorate the person's suffering, but also giving suffering that meaning. Think of what that does. Think of the patient at the bedside who's in hospice care, so at the end of their life. Both of my parents were like that at the end of their lives. What it did is it brought the priest to give last rites, including my brother, the bishop.
Yeah.
My mom got last rites from her son, the bishop. But that's a good thing, an absolute good that came out of that suffering. He came to the bedside. It brought people. It brought my brothers to the bedside. It brought nurses who cared for her to be able to feel like I'm healing this human person. Now, what value? There's an immense value to that. That we're devaluing by saying, let's just do the quick fix and eliminate all suffering.
Right. Let's do the quick fix that could involve, well, in extreme cases, like you mentioned, euthanasia, actually getting rid of the subject entirely.
Right.
Or quick fixes that could potentially put them in danger of, further health complications, right? Like if the complete elimination of suffering becomes the end all be all, then maybe after it's like, okay, 600 milligrams of ibuprofen didn't work. Okay, take a few more. It's like, okay, but eventually you should stop taking ibuprofen, right? And just actually, you're going to have to deal with the pain.
Yes, absolutely.
Doctor, can I? So you mentioned your own personal example, and I want to bring one to kind of the stage as well. So my grandmother's had Alzheimer's and dementia for many, many years, right? And she stays at our house actually, and so we care for her. I've oftentimes wondered in relation to what you're bringing up now, the easy thing would do when these things started happening more seriously and her condition worsened is to put her maybe in a nursing home or to put her maybe in some other person's house that takes care of her that I don't have to worry about. Right. And I know the nursing home option isn't always an invaluable one or sometimes is necessary and sometimes can even be good for people. That's not what I'm diminishing. But what I am saying is like that always seems to be like the route because we have jobs. My parents work. I am in seminary. My brothers are in universities. All this stuff. It's like how can we tend to her and not give her some level of like dignified existence? Oh, and by the way, she has all these kids that need to take care of her. Right. So I oftentimes think about like all these things running through my head, but it does seem to be an interesting dynamic because at her suffering, in fact, it does seem to be a life-giving source to our family. In fact, she's one of the very few occasions in our family that actually brings everybody together, as you were saying. You know, and she's on her way to death. We all are, but she's closer to it because of her age and her illness. But yet, like when we're together for her birthday, for all these things, like we all of a sudden are all kind of on board. Like we're all our tensions, all our difficulties. Here we are again, not only kind of giving her some dignified existence, even though she doesn't know or remember or can recall these things. She also, in turn, gives us a dignified existence by acknowledging this person.
Yeah, I think that's this sort of fourth part of John Paul II's idea of person, this solidarity. I mean, this is radical solidarity, right? Mm-hmm. I see myself in you and you are in me. And by lifting you up, I'm actually fulfilling myself and my calling as a human person. Taking the 10,000-foot view, like I'm imagining looking down in your living room and seeing your family members gathered there.
Well, for you, it would be like a 4.8 view.
Yes,
right.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
Oh my gosh, we gotta try to treat our guests with respect.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
I love
Max
it.
loves making fun of people
maybe I'd be standing on a ladder looking down, right? But imagining that scene and thinking, gosh, if this is a suffering that obviously we wish wasn't happening.
Yeah.
At one level. But at the same time, look what it's brought. Look what it's brought together. Look whom it's brought together. Look at the love that's in this room. Those are sort of invaluable experiences that I think even if we wish there was another way, which is natural to wish that, but even if we wish there was another way, we should still recognize the value of it. So to say suffering is meaningless, I think really does a disservice to medicine and really to us as human beings. I mean, John Paul II talked about in his encyclical on suffering, he talked about suffering as one of the purposes of it is to unleash love in the world.
Love that so much.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that too. I think it's to unleash love in the world. And this is the sort of, when he says human beings are meant to participate in suffering, we participate in it together. And one of the things that suffering does is this unleashing of love. And, and he talks about these other aspects of suffering, that it's a call to conversion. For example, like when we suffer, and maybe sometimes we suffer because of our own choices.
Yeah.
This is a gift. In a way, suffering is a gift and a call to conversion, and then also a call to virtue. Sometimes we are meant to bear things, and in bearing those things, it sort of grows the virtues that we already have.
Mm-hmm. It stretches our heart, right? Like to be able to love more, kind of thing.
Exactly. I years into my medical career, I finally understood. You guys probably understood this really early, but I finally understood the scene at the cross. When I think about medicine, and I think about Christ on the cross, and these three people, St. Mary Magdalene, St. John, and Mary, who are standing there for 3 hours, and they don't. There's not much that's exchanged. There's not much that's said. They are standing there being present to a dying person and watching the Savior of the world suffer. That wasn't by accident. Christ meant to send that as an example about what suffering is and what its meaning is. both for the person who suffers, that you can suffer and die and still die with dignity.
Yeah.
Not 1 ounce of Christ's human dignity was removed by the fact that he was crucified and tortured, and not 1 ounce of dignity was removed. And his courage at the end demonstrated that this is a human person who still has dignity. He tells the good thief, Dismas, that you too will be with me in heaven.
Yeah.
And sort of affirms this dignity that was never lost, even though the fact that Dismas is still also suffering the same punishment. And then here at the foot of the cross are these 3 almost silent people. We don't hear anything from Mary Magdalene, but these others that are just willing to watch this person that they absolutely love suffer and die. And when you think about John Paul II saying this is a call to conversion, this is a call to virtue, this is a call to unleash love, and you think about that in relation to these saints at the foot of the cross and Christ himself. Wow, what a powerful harmony that shows of those, of what we're being tried, what's being taught there.
Yeah.
In that image.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reflection and image. I had not thought about the cross in that context, so thank you for that meditation. Just to kind of, for my own sake, articulate kind of what's been said. So from the perspective of a doctor who's experiencing a patient suffering, what we're not saying is suffering has value, so we should just let that patient suffer.
Right.
What we're saying is we should, as a doctor, someone who has compassion for the patient, real compassion, should try to take away that patient's suffering, but he should be aware of his limits, right?
Right.
And he should respect that patient as a person who has dignity, not just as a material pile of cells that he can try to manipulate or plug different equations into in order to take away suffering at all costs.
Right.
And that might mean coming up against the limit of your ability to, take away suffering, and therefore instead just choosing to suffer with that person, to be there with that person.
Yes. And that's a hard thing to do. Imagine if you changed one thing. Imagine if every physician and every nurse and every healthcare practitioner believed this, that no matter what happened to your physical body, you still had invaluable dignity. Okay, that's all. Just buy into that one line.
Yeah.
Think of how the practice of medicine would change, right? Because if you knew that was an absolute truth, that no matter what happened to your physical body, you still had dignity, you would really work at trying to be present to a person. You would really work at trying to uplift their perception of their own dignity. I mean, we know from empirical evidence in the medical literature that people who are suffering in an intractable pain at the end of life, even this whole idea in the psychiatric and mental health literature about existential suffering.
Yeah.
I may not have physical pain, but I'm suffering from my own existence. That this idea that if you can convince people that I believe that you have dignity still, it would change their outlook on their own view about dignity and how much that would do to help to ameliorate that person's own suffering. I think that would radically change medicine. But if you, on the opposite end, if you start to believe that as your physical body deteriorates, you're also losing that invaluable dignity that God gave you, and somehow you're becoming you might be less dignified, but you're actually losing your dignity, then that would also change the way you practice medicine.
Yeah.
And for the worse.
Yeah. There's a quote I wanted to run by you just to see what you thought about it. I recently heard it said to me in class, actually in my Pope John Paul II encyclicals class. Funny enough, but the professor quoted.
You guys take a class on that? That's awesome.
It did. There's an elective on it's actually,
wow.
and the professor who we've had on the show before is Dr. Ignatic, and he himself being from Poland, knowing Polish and having deep intimacy and connection to JP2. Anyways, all that to say, he actually started one of the classes by asking us a question. He's like, "Guys, where does a person get value?" I'm like, come on, man. It's after lunch. It's 1 p.m. I don't know. What do you want me to say? I mean, do you want the definition of Bonaventure Aquinas? What do you want me to do here? You want me to nerd out or what? He did want us to nerd out, but also he wanted us to kind of confront the question that he was asking. Where does a person gain value? And I think, and I see this trend in kind of right now, contemporary technology with the whole question of like AI right now, you have this big question. And I do think personhood is again being challenged, right? Like, what about creativity? What about decision? What about like all these things? You have these questions. It's like personhood is on the table again. What do we make of this? In the medical field, kind of, and on topic with what we're talking about, this question becomes, where's the value of the person found? And so he asked this question, and I'm like, this and that, this and that. And he says, Benedict writes, the value of the person is actually found in his ability to dialogue with God. And I've always found that I've been thinking about it since he said it, partly because I've been preparing for this talk, but also just like in my own personal life, like the value of the person is found in his ability to dialogue with God. And going back to your example of the cross, what does Christ do? He takes up human nature, right, and reconciles it with the divine presence, with God himself. So like the divine nature and the human nature come together in the divine person, and then is offered back in the person of Jesus Christ to the Father, by which kind of this bridge is built for man to, in fact, talk with God, right, and be one with him and kind of unite and be in communion with him. But when a person approaches life through this purely materialistic lens, that whole kind of sum and beauty and gift is just neglected, discarded.
Yes.
Is rejected. Yep. And it's not just like, oh, well, that's just your religion, Christian God. No, it's like God himself, the creator, right, actually sanctifies and is able to heal, and bring about the redemptive even amidst suffering, even amidst death. And I think that's something that's, as you said earlier, it's kind of insulting to just forget that.
Yeah, and who would choose it? Right. If you take even people that aren't religious or are secular, or which version of the human person do you really want?
Yeah.
I mean, just think about, take a step back and think about these two competing views. One is so much richer. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I mean, again, John Paul II talks about how that suffering is not unidirectional, as he says. It's not just one way from man to God or from God to man, but because Jesus suffered, there is this bi-directional flow of the nature and the meaning of suffering, and also of human persons and their value, right? So this dialogue with God, when Benedict says this, I'm guessing he doesn't mean you could actually talk, because obviously fetuses, unborn children who can't dialogue, disabled people who can't talk, but it's precisely those examples that really make me reflect on maybe the question we should be asking is, what kind of value do you want for a human being? To ask the secular world even. Mm-hmm. If you could make, people want to be so inclusive in our day and age, and inclusivity is not a negative word, it's not a bad word, but the most inclusive view of human value and human person is the Catholic view.
It's so true.
We're saying that there's nothing that you can do or not do or have done or won't do that negates your personhood and negates your value. I think that's huge. I think what's happened to personhood, especially in medicine, it's become seen through the lens of functionality. Mm-hmm. What can this person do? And then in parentheses, you could put, for me. Okay, which is why we start to see, if that's what personhood is, then we can start to see why, okay, well, when you're suffering intractably, when you have Alzheimer's, late-stage Alzheimer's, when you're in a persistent vegetative state, you can't do anything, parentheses, for me. And in fact, you're starting to actually hurt my prospects.
Yeah.
In many ways. And so the value of the human person is degraded. If you're an unborn child that was unplanned, what can you do? Well, you can't think, you can't breathe on your own, you can't. So again, functionality.
Right.
But then what can you do? Parentheses, for me. Again, that really sort of starts to degrade that human person's value, and I think that's a dangerous place for people to go. Do we really want a world in which your value is based on what you do, or your functionality, or your higher level consciousness, or whether you can still walk, or whether you can still talk? I don't think we do.
No.
And if even for, sort of more liberal people or left-leaning people or secular people, then how do they justify? If they don't like that, if that makes them feel uncomfortable, the idea of a functional humanity or functional human personhood, well, then explain, justify how without faith, without transcendence, without metaphysics, you can explain or justify anything more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or what do you want? Like,
yeah.
That's what you're asking, right? It's like if you don't want what actually is proposed and seems to be the universal, the all-encompassing view of the dignity of the person, or at least the closest to it, what do you want? And make it clear, because the alternative seems degradative and
to you
and harmful.
too. Like I would want to be in a place. I always think about this in Catholic, in terms of Catholic hospitals. As much as the criticism is of Catholic hospitals these days, just go and read their mission statements.
Yeah.
We believe that the patient is a creation of God. Go read the mission statements and their statement of values for any Catholic hospital, and contrast that with secular hospitals. And if you were a person who, and realize, like, as much as people criticize the Catholic Church, read what they say about the human person and the sick patient in their statement of values. Look at the ethical and religious directives of Catholic hospitals. Read what they say, what our church believes about the human person. And even if you were not Catholic, and even if you were a non-believer, ask yourself, who would you like to take care of you? Right. Would you like people to take care of you who think you're just a bundle of choices, and that whatever you choose, I'm going to affirm just because you choose it? Mm-hmm. Or would you like people to take care of you who believe, you know what? You have value no matter what you choose, and I'm gonna be with you, and I'm gonna sit in solidarity with you, and I'm gonna offer my presence to you even after my tools run out. Yeah. And I think rational people would choose that sort of Catholic anthropology, that personalistic anthropology, even if they weren't really committed to the religious aspects, just because it's better.
Especially if they were the patient.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're in a vulnerable position, that's who you want to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to a point you made briefly earlier. Sorry to cut you off.
It's okay. All the time.
So I just want to kind of say it. We're at a distance here, and it's kind of tough to see when, because I'm not in front of y'all, so I can't tell when y'all are about to say something or whatever. It's not very personalist, if you will, But I just wanted to say, you mentioned earlier that, like, at the very actually origins of modern medicine is deeply kind of connected to Catholicism. Historically, that's the case. And I do think you're right to kind of call that to mind. And I know one of the things y'all covered briefly in the conference that I heard you speak at and then invited you to come on here at, y'all talked about that's like actually the whole idea of caretaking comes from, or the whole idea of nursing comes from actually sisters who would take care of their dying sister, the older dying sister, and they would care for them. And I've just always wondered, it's like those, if you look at those examples within the church yourself or the church's history, now kind of popularized and then taken religiously now into the world to modern medicine. But if you take those examples kind of in their historical roots, it's all coming from kind of this compassion, this desire to help, to bear the suffering, to be in union with, and to not just simply neglect, but actually to make their suffering in a certain way redemptive and valuable, not just kind of discard them as another patient or whatever.
Yeah, and in a world, I mean, think about the origins of medicine through Christianity, and how radical this idea was of taking care of people who could not take care of themselves, and doing it not for money, not because they were your friend, they were strangers, and you took care of them. That's scriptural. That is this radical love that Christianity teaches. Mm-hmm. And you think of Lazarus, like these examples, the parables, Lazarus, the Good Samaritan, Jesus healing the lepers, the outcasts. Christians took that literally. This is our mission.
Yeah. Healing
the sick is what Christ did. This is what we're going to do. And people just didn't do that in the ancient world. If you were sick, if you were disabled, you were disposable. We're getting to that point we're getting to that point in a secular world. Christianity stood as the antidote to that. And for almost 2,000 years, there it stood. And I think we need to get back to that idea. I heard this story from a doctor who was giving a talk, and he said he had met Mother Teresa. He had the privilege of meeting St. Mother Teresa. And he was working with her and her sisters, and he was telling Mother Teresa, he was talking about his own, like how important that experience had been in working with the poor of India and the sick and infirm. And he's like, I understand my vocation now as like Jesus, as Jesus, sort of Jesus healing the sick. and how this had sort of radically transformed him. And she, Mother Teresa, all of like 5 foot nothing, right, cut him off and said, yes, it is good that you recognize that you are Christ, but it's more important that you recognize that your patient is Christ. And he said that really rocked his world. Like, that really humbled him. Right. That really humbled him, but it was such a simple thing. And if you think about that in the history of Christianity and its commitment to medicine, to truly personalistic medicine, that's what it is. This person that you're trying to heal is Jesus Christ, is made in that image. That's the motivation. Again, I would ask secular people, like, can you get any better than that? Like, we're going to treat you as if you have the dignity of God himself. And when we start to lose that or be embarrassed by that, which I know, criticism of Catholic hospitals, a lot of people are embarrassed by these ideas. They shouldn't be embarrassed.
Yeah.
It's having that anthropology is better. Mm-hmm. It's better for medicine and it's better for healing.
Wow. Well, this has been awesome.
I've loved it. It's
so cool. This has been such a good conversation. I'm so thankful. I'm sure we could keep talking for a long time. But for the sake of your time and Max's bedtime,
that passed about 2 hours ago. All right, so let's wrap the show up.
We should conclude. I just want to say, before we give you a chance to say any concluding remarks, Doctor, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a blessing, such a great conversation to have, and it's I'm given a lot of hope knowing that there's someone like you out there in the medical world, kind of witnessing to the truth and beauty of the Christian tradition. So that's what. Yeah, Max, you have anything to add?
I echo obviously what Joey's saying. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your service to the church. We say time and time again, we're seminarians hoping and aspiring for the priesthood, and we will serve in the way we can. But we also thank you for serving in the way that you know how to, for giving your life up in this way. And it's really life giving, both biologically, but also I think spiritually, right, for people. I hope.
Well, I want to echo that and mirror that back to you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me, first of all. And secondly, thank you for your service. I hope people listening to this podcast realize like how amazing it is to have two seminarians who are aspiring to be holy priests. And for me as a Catholic physician, I look at you guys, you young guys who want to be priests. And full disclosure, I'm the bishop's brother. My brother I used to have an identity, but now I'm just the bishop's brother. But I have a brother who's a priest and who went through what you guys are going through. But it gives me such heart and hope to know, our job has limits, right? As doctors, we can only go so far. Mm-hmm. And that's almost where you guys step in, right? So you're the spiritual healers who come in. We have to pray for each other. It was so wonderful at both the conference in 2021 and then again this year to see so many seminarians sitting side by side with our medical students. I was like, it was sort of like the Lord of the Rings, the men of Numenor. You can look out in your army and you can see you have a scattering of the men of Numenor. And so you feel a little hope, like, okay, I've got these guys and they're gonna do great things. So thank you again for having me on and for what you do.
Doctor, just as a last remark, and I don't know if you have any on hand, or maybe we'll also link some below. Do you have any maybe recommendations for people who are listening to this who are in the medical field and who you think would be good guides to kind of infuse their practice with Christian anthropology, maybe a couple books or podcasts, some articles? Is there anything that you have?
Actually, Max, that's an excellent question. I actually have I have 4. 3 of them are encyclicals, and one of them is a small little book on political philosophy. So let me tell you, the 3 are encyclicals of John Paul II, and I think they're really relevant to bioethics and to getting a foundational understanding of the human person as it relates to bioethics. One is The Splendor of Truth, The Gospel of Life, and
you just said ratio?
Yes, that's
maybe?
It. Faith and reason. And actually that might be, those are my sort of top 3, I think, that really will help people to understand the nature of the human person, the nature of science versus faith, not versus science and faith. And then the other one is a little book called The Person and the Common Good, which is by a French philosopher named Jacques Maritain.
Okay.
And he's a Christian personalist. You have to read this book. radically changed my life,
Okay.
And my worldview. And essentially, Jacques Maritain is this, he's a French philosopher. He's a Christian personalist. He's writing this book in 1946 in the aftermath of World War II. He's, by the way, one of the architects of the UN Declaration on Human Rights.
That's right. That's right.
And the first part of this, and he greatly influenced John Paul II, Maritain and Marcel and these French philosophers. Yeah, so
Hildebrand too.
And Hildebrand. So these this book, this little tiny volume, The Person and the Common Good, starts out with this sort of explication of the human person as it relates to God and the Trinity, which is an important chapter. But then he sort of goes through the idea of personalism and what that means, and how political philosophies like Nazism, for example, they had this very robust notion of person, unless there's this caveat, right? Unless you interfered with the goals of the race,
of the collective, yeah.
Right? And then communism did the same thing. Unless you interfere, you were great. If you were a person, that's awesome. You have these rights, unless you interfered with the goal of the state. And then he talks about even unbridled capitalism, which can say, the treatment of workers and things like that. Basically, you can have a situation in which, you're a person unless you interfere with profit. So anytime in these sort of ideologies, philosophies, where there's another good that eclipses the good of the human person in and of herself by herself, you have disaster. You have the sacrifice of that person. And he's arguing that basically the only way to create a just society is to have a philosophy of the person in which nothing can eclipse the value of a single individual person, not people en masse.
Right.
Like medical students who are interviewing for medical school will say, oh yeah, I want to be a doctor because I love people. It's not enough to love people.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah.
People loving is easy. Person loving is hard.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that really changes the way. In fact, Maritain argues all of society. He says, he has this great quote in there. I'm paraphrasing again, but it's something like, society is made for the person, not the other way around. So we can't ever use a single individual person for our own goods, for our own ends, or for some other good. And so I think people should read that book. Once you read that book, you'll understand, like, this makes sense. Oh, and by the way, guess what? The church said this hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
And this is not anything new. This is sort of the articulation of a philosophy that the church has always believed. And you'll really love it. It'll change you.
Nice.
Wow.
So guys, I think that rounds out our episode here. Again, thank you, Doctor, for coming on, for making the time. I know out of your busy schedule, this is one little thing amidst all of that.
No problem.
Joey,
I loved it.
Thank you for coming on.
It's my privilege
for making
really
it
to be here.
Guys, we hope you learned something. We hope our Catholic and non-Catholic people have learned something. For those in the medical field, we hope particularly that you benefited from this and that you are able to infuse the world with a respect for the persons, a love for the persons, not just people, as Doctor just said, and to by then ultimately, together reconcile and be offered together to our Lord Jesus Christ. We hope that you came in contact with the logos, and as always, God bless.